بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We begin in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and we ask that God bestow His blessings upon us this evening as we gather in His house to prepare ourselves for the blessed month of Ramadan. Ramadan is within sight. We can sense its arrival, and as we prepare for this blessed guest, we prepare our houses, we prepare our hearts, we prepare our minds, we prepare our souls. For Allah has gifted us with this beautiful month. It's a gift, and we know that it's a gift because we've experienced it before in the past, and we enjoy its sweetness, and we miss it when it's gone. So it is almost upon us, and we are very much looking forward to make the most out of it. Our greatest regret is when the month of Ramadan is almost over, and we ask ourselves, did we really benefit as much as we could have from the month? And we find ourselves remiss, regretful, that maybe we could have done more, maybe we could have gotten more blessings out of this month. We could have elevated our character, our souls more during this month. So, barakallahu, may Allah bless the organizers of this series of talks that's aimed to help all of you who are dedicated enough to stay between the Maghrib and Isha to help prepare us, for this month. So I'm going to give a talk, but then I want to make it interactive because I think that each one of you brings an experience and a wisdom that we can all benefit from. So I'll give my talk first, and I'll try not to go too long in my portion, and then we can really make it, we can benefit from the perspective that each one of us brings. So the title is Ramadan and Family. And we all know that if you were to describe what is Ramadan, what is this month all about? And sometimes you have to explain this month to your colleagues at work, to your neighbors. How do you describe it? Sometimes you say, well, it's a month of fasting. We fast for a whole month, except we eat in the evening and drink in the evening. Sometimes you say, well, it's a blessed month, the month that the Quran was revealed. And we read the entire Quran during that month. Also correct. Sometimes you say it's a month of charity. We give a lot of charity during that month because when we're fasting, we feel the pain and the hunger of those who do not have food normally, and so we are more generous, and it's more rewarding to give during that month, and so it's a month of charity. And that's also correct. And then some of you might say, well, it's a month of intense community. Because we're not in isolation doing it, we're not in a monastery, we are in community, we gather together. We gather in the masjid for the breaking of the fast many times, we gather in each other's homes for the breaking of the fast. We gather together in the masjid for the prayers and for the taraweeh. It's an intense month of community, which is also a correct answer. It's all of those things, but it is not to be forgotten that it is also a month of family. This month is a month of family. It's a month that bridges the generation gap. You know, in this culture, we have a generation gap. We have a gap between the parents and the children. And the gap occurs for a number of reasons, and I want to unpack some of those reasons tonight and talk about how Ramadan is an opportunity and a tool that Allah has given us to bridge that gap, to close that distance between us and our children, and bring us closer with the mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, elevate in a way that will elevate our collective souls as a family and make us more in obedience and more mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So with all of that said on the outset, let us talk a little bit about the idea or the notion of how Ramadan, how we can prepare ourselves to best benefit from this month in bridging that gap. But let's talk a little bit about that gap, how it's formed, and understand it, wrap our minds around it. Then we can talk about how we can address bridging that gap through the month of Ramadan. So how many of you here have children? Raise your hand. Only 3 people have children? All right. Let me put the question this way. How many of you do not yet have children? Raise your hand. All right. May Allah bless you with children, inshallah. So, having children, some of you might have children in college age or above. Raise your hand. College age or above. A couple of you. High school age or above. All right. Middle school. Nobody has middle school age children. Elementary school. Younger than school age. All right. So we have the spectrum here. So let's start from the beginning. You know, I've served for many years as the Imam and Religious Director at the Islamic Center of Southern California on Vermont. And in that capacity, I was in charge of the youth group. I have many years before taught Sunday schools. Myself, I have 4 children. My son is here tonight. My middle son, I have two boys and 2 girls, so my middle son, who's 11, is here with me. I have children of my own from ages 13 to 4. My youngest is 4. And I've dealt for many years with challenges that the community members at the Islamic Center had faced in bridging this gap or experiencing this gap. And a number of months ago, I gave a khutbah on this topic. So if you were present for that khutbah, please forgive me if there's some redundancy. But I've received complaints. Sometimes I would get a call. I remember one time I received a phone call from a father who was very frantic. And he said, "Brother, I really need your help. I need you to talk to my daughter. She's run away with her boyfriend. She's 17 years old. She's run away with her boyfriend. Can you please help her? Help bring her back to the practice of the religion." I said, "Well, you know, I don't know you. You haven't been coming around to the masjid. I see you're facing a crisis now. We've missed you here. How come you haven't come earlier?" He said, "Brother, my wife is Christian, and I was always working. So my wife didn't bring the children to the mosque, and I was working to provide for them a good living. So I was working very hard. I didn't have time to bring them to the masjid." I said, "Okay. And your wife is Christian?" She said, "Yes, she's Catholic, but we agreed to raise our children as Muslim." I said, "Okay. I'll talk to your daughter if she wants to talk to me. You can't force her to talk to me. She's already run away from home. But if she's open for it, I'll talk to her." So she agreed to talk with me, and we spoke on the phone. And I was expecting for us to speak on the phone and then arrange a time to come in, and then I would speak with them in person. But I spoke to her on the phone, one-on-one, and I asked her, I said, "So tell me a little bit about yourself." She says, "Well, I'm 17, and my father is upset that I have a boyfriend, and so he's being unpleasant, so we moved out." And I said, "So are you Muslim?" She said, "Well, my father wants me to be Muslim." And I said, "Well, what is your belief?" She said, "Well, my mother wants me to be Christian." And I said, "Does your father know that?" She said, "No, my mother, my mother wants us to be Christian, and she tells us to pray to Jesus when my father's not around. And and I like my mother more than my father, and so I consider myself Christian." I said, "Okay, thank you very much. Can I please speak to your father again?" And so, I told the father, I said, "I can't help you. Your daughter doesn't identify herself as a Muslim. You have other issues here. It would have, this is you see the problem now, but the roots of the problem go deep, all the way back to when you decided to marry, and how you decided to raise your children, and how you decided to spend your time as a father just providing materially for your children and not really providing spiritually for your children, to provide that foundation of faith in your household." So he's panicking because his daughter's moving out and living with her boyfriend, but he should have been panicking 17 years ago. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Excuse me, 1 second. I hate to interrupt you. Is anyone of you driving a Honda Accord? He's blocking someone across the street. He's like a rapid fire. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. So let us now talk about, so we see that the challenges. There's a gap that occur, and this was an extreme example, but I have to tell you, this is not a rare example, unfortunately, in our community. I see a trend now of Muslim women marrying outside the faith. I see a trend of children losing their Islamic identity. I see a trend of Muslims losing sight of their roots, losing connection to their roots. It's a growing challenge, and we can't address the problem after it's already producing the negative results. We have to anticipate what those results are going to be and preempt them by creating the environment in the home, in the family, that will enable us to pass on the faith successfully. So, the first step in establishing a good family home within Ramadan or outside of Ramadan, the first step, and this is not a rhetorical question, this is an actual question, is what? What is the first thing we need to do in order to establish a wholesome Islamic Muslim home? The first step. Raise your hand. Anyone? Yes. To have the right intention. Who has to have the right intention? You do. It starts with you. The first element of a successful family is the individual who wants to start the family, who wants to create the family. You have to have pure intention, sincerity, the desire, the mindset, the vision of creating a family that's wholesome. Now, sometimes some of us might have immigrated. My father, for example, immigrated here from Palestine in 1956. He came here many years ago. And many who immigrate here were raised back home. You know, the parents played a role, but mostly society played the role. Everyone's Muslim there, and so society plays the major role in the family. You know, they take care of your needs, but you're out in the street and you're with neighbors and in society, and there's no filter, and you know, you pick up everything that you need from school and your friends and the neighbors and the culture. And so oftentimes when Muslims come here, they have that sense of how they were raised, and so when it comes time to raising their children, they think, oh, well, we'll have children, and you know, they'll come out like I did just because I was exposed to all of those things, so we'll send our kids to school, and this is their friends, and everything will form their identity as Muslims. The problem with that thinking is we live in a non-Muslim society. We live in a culture and a society that is not Islamic, that does not reinforce the Muslim identity. It challenges the Muslim identity, potentially. There's not a clash, I would say, but mainstream American culture is not completely in line with Islamic values. There are many overlaps. And you have extreme American culture that deviates from Islamic. You know, sometimes people think American culture is anti-Islamic. No, American culture is incredibly in sync with Islam, potentially. But there are elements within an American society and American culture that can really drive your children away from the practice of the faith. So it's important for you as the individual who's creating the family, man or woman, to start with the mindset of, if I'm going to take on the responsibility of getting married and starting a family, I need to be mindful of, the first thing is having the right intention, and the second thing is, what's that? Communication. Before communication, who are you communicating with? What's that? Finding the spouse, the husband or the wife. Before you communicate with someone, you have to have someone to communicate with, right? So it's finding the right spouse. This is a huge challenge. This is not a small, trivial matter in our community. It's finding the right spouse. Finding the right spouse is not easy. It's not easy for Muslims who are practicing and faithful. You're not going to go to a club or a bar or a, a place like that and find a Muslim spouse that you're going to marry. Sometimes Muslim men do that. They go and they find someone that they're attracted to in a place that's un-Islamic, and then they think, oh, I'll teach her Islam. Well, the best of you before Islam are the best of you in Islam, and probably going to a bar or a club is not the right place to find the best of you before Islam if that's your intention. So, how do you then find a good Muslimah, a good practicing, believing woman? You can't do it at the mosque because there's no interaction between genders. So what are you left to do? If you're an immigrant here or you don't have family here to do the scouting for you, what are you left to do? It's limited. Unfortunately, our communities are not providing the space and the venue and the vehicle for young, believing, faithful men to find young, believing, faithful women. There has to be a service provided. Now, there are some online services and there's some other things, but it's challenging. It's not easy, and I don't envy someone who's not yet married to find, in terms of the work that they have cut out for them, finding a spouse. May Allah guide you and help you. But as community, it behooves us, if you're married and you know people in the community and you know people who need to get married, whether you're the imam or you're just a practicing Muslim, you have a role to play in helping those unmarried find people who are married. If you know both people well, you can recommend. And if you don't know both people well, you don't have to recommend because that's a heavy responsibility. At least maybe you can have an event at your home, invite a few people there, couples, and maybe a few unmarried people, but have a nice halal environment and provide the opportunity for people to get to know one another. This is fi sabilillah. This is a service, especially if your friends and the people you know are practicing the religion. It's extremely important because so oftentimes people get married to someone that they don't know well, and it's not a good match. The divorce rate in Islam, in America, amongst American Muslims, is estimated to be as high as it is in society at large, 50%. 50% of marriages, wallahu a'lam, 50% according to guesstimations by scientists. We don't have exact numbers because the records for marriage and divorce are not based on religious. So there's other means that are being used by social scientists to estimate these numbers. But according to some preliminary research, it seems that the divorce rate among Muslims is 50%. Subhanallah. This is a musibah. This is a disaster for our community. And sometimes the divorce happens after the children are born, and the children are torn between this and that, and it becomes very messy. So the usra, the family, is the central unit, the building block of the Muslim community. And being prepared yourself and finding the right spouse are the first two steps. Now, in preparing yourself, I'll say, in addition to having the right intention and sincerity, I would say there's 3 things you should look for in the spouse, but before you look for in the spouse, you look for in yourself. Those 3 things are, number 1, how does that person treat his or her family in good times and in bad? And what I mean by that is, are they close to their family? Do they spend time with their family? Are they helpful with their parents? Are they close to their siblings? And the most important question is the most difficult to find out, is how does that person argue and resolve arguments with the people in their household, with their parents, with their siblings? Do they cut ties? Do they turn a cold shoulder? Do they yell, scream, throw things, curse? All of those things. How that person behaves towards their family is how that person will behave towards you as a spouse. Now that's the most difficult. I'm not saying I have an answer on how you find out the answer to that question with regards to the spouse. But before you ask it about the spouse, you ask it about yourself. How is it that you treat your family? How is it that you agree and disagree and argue and resolve arguments with your family? So this is the first aspect of character that you look for in the other, but also reflect upon in yourself. The second is you look to the friends of the person. You look to his or her friends. How are they? Who do they hang out with? There's the Arabic saying, the method, al-mar'u ala dini khalili. the person or the individual follows the character of his close associates. The person has the same character as his or her friends, basically. So you need to figure out who is that person hanging out with. And again, if you know of someone or you're trying to investigate whether someone's a good match, before you fall in love and have those deep emotions, you need to do your homework first. Because sometimes when people fall in love, they say love is blind. Love is blinding. It can blind you from the red flags. And so if you already have the emotional connection, you'll overlook this and overlook that. So love is not necessarily blind, but it's blinding. And so, you know, it's important not to develop the emotional attachment or to construct an image of who the person is without even knowing the person. So you need to find out who their friends are. That will reflect what kind of person they are. And thirdly, how does that person spend his or her time? What does that person do when they have free time? Do they spend it chatting online, playing video games, doing useless things, or does that person spend the extra time at the masjid, in community, serving the community, reading books, memorizing the Quran, growing in his or her knowledge and faith, enjoying the outdoor and sports and being physically active? How does that person spend his or her free time? And then for yourselves, how do you spend your free time? What do you do to fill those moments that is not otherwise occupied by work? These are the issues of character that you need to ask about yourself and then look for in your spouse. And you want to find someone who matches you and your values. And the problem is when we get married, oftentimes we marry someone for who we think they are without really knowing them. Number one, that's the first problem. The second problem is we marry someone for who we think we can make them into, not for who they are now. And I always tell couples before they get married, before you agree, before you make the proposal and tie the knot, the question is, if that person, if that spouse does not change in the next 10, 15 years, will you be content? If they're at the same level of iman, the same level of practice as they are right now, will you be content in your heart 15 years later, 20 years later, to be the mother or the spouse, right? To be the mother for your children or the husband for your children. So this is the steps 1 and 2. Once you've found the right spouse, then it comes to communication, my brother. It comes to communicate. You do have to communicate. And the number one cause of divorce in the United States in general is what? What's the number one cause of divorce? What's that? I set you up for that one, didn't I? Lack of communication. It's not really lack of communication. It is in a sort. Fighting over money, right? Fighting over money is one thing that generally results in couples divorcing. But it's not so much the money itself. And it's not so much the lack of communication, or it is kind of related to lack of communication. But it's a specific aspect of the communication. It's lack of, how can I articulate this? The number one cause for divorce are unmet expectations of the other. And what I mean by that is you have certain internal ideas of what you expect from the other person with regards to money, with regards to, you know, their practice of the faith, with regards to how they will spend their time, who they will have as friends, how they will treat you, how they will treat guests in your how they will treat your family. You have expectations in your mind. And guess what? Your spouse has expectations of you also. And if they're not met because of lack of communication, then there's tension. And people, through that tension, they try to manipulate you into meeting those expectations through pressure, through emotional manipulation, passive-aggressive behavior, all kinds of techniques that result in tension between the husband and the wife. Whereas, if you have clear communication and express your expectations that you have of yourself in the relationship and that you have of the other before you get married, and if there's a match, then this eliminates all of those points of tension and points of argument over this, that, and the other. So communication, effective communication is essential. And yes, you might change or grow in your expectations, but it's important that you communicate along the way as you grow or change as an individual, and as your spouse does the same, that you revisit those expectations and that you have clear communication. I was married 19 years ago, and I asked a lot of people for advice before I got married, people that I respected. And one person said to me a bit of advice that I thought was invaluable. They said, whenever you are in an argument with your wife, resolve the argument before sleeping at night. Because if you don't resolve it before sleeping at night, you will grow a cold heart. So resolve the argument before sleeping at night, even if it leads to some sleepless nights. Because that's more important, not to grow distance. Because one night apart becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes a week, becomes a month. There are couples that the husband and wife live in separate bedrooms. Some of you might know couples like that. They live in separate bedrooms. They've just become so distant that they've lost that connection. This is not a rare thing. I know of a couple, they have separate houses next to each other. They're not married to other people, they just have separate houses. They could afford it, but they have separate houses next to each other. So, communication, expressing your expectations, resolving differences before you sleep. And one of the things that's kind of a gem, a golden rule that leads to a successful relationship is expressing not just your expectations. This is the least expensive thing that results in the most reward, the most return on your investment ever. You cannot imagine the beauty and of the return on this investment that costs you nothing. But people are stingy on this one. Expressing appreciation for the other. It's easy. A thank you. A specific thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for cooking this meal. Thank you for greeting me warmly. Thank you for dressing nicely. Thank you for speaking to me. Thank you for helping with the children. Thank you for this thing. It's small. It's easy. It didn't cost you a thing, but the return on the investment is huge. And who doesn't like to be thanked when your spouse tells you, thank you for working so hard for the family. Thank you for this. It feels great. It goes both ways. It goes both ways. So these are some gems, some golden rules for a successful relationship. So once you have that harmonious relationship between husband and wife, and all of us, I'm sure, have a ways to go to get to that ideal relationship. And, as the Prophet taught us, that marriage is half of your faith, because you are struggled, you are challenged in your character, in your faith, in your patience through that marital relationship. It's never going to be just easy. You don't put it on autopilot. The moment you put the relationship on autopilot is the moment you failed in the relationship. There's going to be tension, there's going to be arguments, there's going to be resolution. It doesn't mean it's a bad relationship. It means that you're both working on it. You both have a ways to go. So once you've achieved, though, the common goals for what kind of household you want to create, what kind of household of faith you want to create, and should God bless you with children, the work starts right away. Now, as parents, sometimes we enjoy the children, well, especially when they're young, because, although they might cry a lot, they don't talk back necessarily at the youngest age. They listen to us. They smile when we tickle them. They play with us. They like us. They're dependent on us, and they're enjoyable at a certain age. But even from the youngest age, even from that tiny age, certain things are extremely important in the formation of the psychology of the child, in the character of the child, and in the spirituality of the child. Certain things are very important for the successful raising of children. The first one is, and this is where people usually go astray, the first and most important aspect of raising young children is anticipating their needs. And what I mean by that is creating a stable and steady and consistent rhythm where they have what they have their food when they need it, they have their nap when they need it, they have their they're taken care of physically when they need those things. They have times of activity and excitement, and then they have times of quiet and tranquility. The easiest thing for us to do, or the habit that we get into, it's a bad habit, is for us to, because we're parents and we're busy, especially when we first have children, it's life-changing. It's traumatic. Our life is no longer, someone is completely dependent on us as a very small life form. We have to take care of every bit of their needs. And before that, we get to enjoy life. And I would always tell young couples, I say, getting married is like halal dating. You enjoy life, you go, and life is great. I said, really, what happens is the big lifestyle changes when you have children. When you have, marriage is like halal dating. Your life is pretty much the same, but you get to enjoy it with a companion. Having children, your life changes. It's no longer yours. Your life is now dedicated to serving your child. You don't just go and on a whim. It's what's the baby's nap schedule? What's the baby's this? You have to change your lifestyle. But one of the things that we do out of laziness is we turn on the television and put the child in front of the television as a way to babysit the child. And something that medical doctors, scientists have studied and come to realize is that that is extremely detrimental to the mental and neurological development of children. The American Medical Association, which isn't an extremely conservative or, it's not extreme in any way, or liberal organization, American Medical Association, the largest and most prominent medical Association of Medical Doctors in the United States, came with an extremely severe recommendation with regards to television, with regards to any screens. That includes iPads and iPods and and notes and iPhones and any kind of anything with a screen, they call it. Any electronic screen. They said that children under the age of 2 should never see a screen. They shouldn't look at screen. They shouldn't watch television. They shouldn't play with, even though they make the games and they're so intuitive. You have the 6-month-old who can beat you in one of those apps, one of the game apps. It's possible they can do it, but they said that it is detrimental to the neurological development of children. That before the age of 2, they shouldn't even have any screen time, 0 minutes a day of screen time. This is what the scientists have concluded conclusively. And it's not like at 2 years old and older, everything is fair game. They suggest after the age of 2, very little, a few minutes. Not that it's ideal, but that it's less detrimental. It's still not good for the neurological development because the brain develops for the first 7 years in a way that is, it's like a sponge. It just absorbs everything. And so the hardest thing when you're married and you have children is to agree on how to raise your children. Something that we didn't put much effort into and thought into because we were each raised and we turned out fine. I turned out fine. I'll just raise our children the way we were raised, and we grew up watching TV and we grew up this and, we're fine. Well, whenever anyone in here is a professional, anyone have a degree in anything? Nobody? Yeah? What's your degree in? Advertising? You got a bachelor's degree in that? Master's degree? No? Anyone have any other bachelor's, master's? Yeah? Physics? Okay. Yes? Economics? Anyone else? No one else has a degree in anything? Do you study in high school? You wouldn't have a profession where it's a professional, they had to study, take certain courses to succeed in that career. Well, the thing is, certain careers that are specialized require training. They require that you go through sometimes 6, 8. My brother-in-law, he turned 35 today. He's still in school. He did his MD, PhD, and he's doing fellowship and subspecialization and another fellowship on top of that. He's still in school. He's 35. He turned 35 years old today. Today was his birthday. He's still in school. There's a lot of training that goes into certain professions, and we dedicate our lives to receiving that training, and then even after, if you go into certain professions, there's continuing education. We dedicate a lot of resources to that. My brothers and sisters, parenting is more important than any profession that you've ever imagined. It is your amana. It is your responsibility. Yes, your professional career might get you more money, might get you more success, might get you more status, but investing in preparing yourselves to be a parent that has the tools and the foundation to pass on the faith, well, then you've done nothing less than fulfilled your trust that Allah has given you, and you can stand before Him on the day of judgment with at least the knowledge that you've given it your best. How many of us have ever read a book from cover to cover on parenting? Just raise your hand if you've read an entire book on how to parent your child. Raise your hand if you've ever read a book on how to be married successfully. Honestly, read it in a book from cover to cover. You have? Excellent. What book? The book entitled Prophet Muhammad as a Husband? Beautiful. Who wrote it? A sister wrote it? Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless her. All right, so one person in here has read a book. I remember when I was getting married, I was 23 years old. I didn't know how to be married. I didn't do what other American kids did through practice relationships and all of that. I didn't go through all of that. I didn't know how to be married. I was a student at Berkeley at the time, and I was studying Islamic history and Arabic and, doing my professional thing. But when I was prepared to get married, I was engaged. I said, I better prepare myself. I went to the bookstore. I got a bunch of books. I got a stack of books on how to be a husband, how to communicate, how to be a good spouse, how to overcome conflicts and engage in conflict resolution. I read them. I read them because I need to prepare for marriage. Maybe not as much as I'm preparing for my degree, but take it seriously. I need to prepare for that. I need to learn. I need to this is a big responsibility. It's half of our faith. Half of our faith. Is your work half of your faith? It might be most of your life, but it's not half of your faith. Marriage is half of your faith. So preparing for that and preparing for parenting is an important thing. And then to be on the same page with your spouse on parenting is a huge deal. How to be on the same page with your spouse. Here's where things fall apart, when you have different ideas of how to discipline your children. One approach might be, you'll call them names like we were called. For those who speak Arabic, Hamar and this and that, right? Ahmed, right? You get called all of these names. Astaghfirullah. Maybe that's what they do back home. You're called name. You call your children names. In some families, smack them, smack the kid, hit them, mistreat them. All right? That's called a punishment. But best practices show that the best response for raising your children isn't punishing them, but it's disciplining them. And there's a difference in the words, in the terms. Punishment is like a retribution. Tit for tat. They did something, I'm going to, give them some kind of consequence that shows them how bad what they did is, and they'll feel the pain, and they're going to learn through that way. So that's called a punishment. Discipline comes from the word disciple, or to follow. And when you discipline a child, what you're doing is helping them to follow the right way to do it. And yes, you should have firm boundaries, and you should have consequences for misbehavior, but the consequences should be appropriate for the action, and it should be not retribution or revenge kind of punishment. It is with the mindset of how they can grow and learn from that mistake. So the first thing is, when disciplining at the younger ages, it's important to, number one, try and preempt the misbehavior by providing for their needs. Because children tend to misbehave when they're overly hungry, or overly tired, or overly stimulated. You want to experience that with children? Overly hungry, overly tired, overly stimulated, they misbehave. So if they misbehave when you've allowed them to be overly tired, overly hungry, or overly stimulated, you can't really get too angry at the child for that. But, so you try and preempt that. Secondly, punishment is not anger. It's not an expression of anger. It's not a losing, anger is losing your control. As a parent, you shouldn't lose control. You should always be in control. You can be upset. You can be firm, but it doesn't mean that you lost control and you're out of control and you're just angry. So it's parenting and disciplining the child is the foundation of spirituality and faith in the household, because they see from all of your behavior how it is that a faithful Muslim woman and Muslim man is, and how there's a friend of mine I serve as president of an Islamic graduate school now called Bayan Claremont, and last weekend I took a number of our faculty members to Houston for a 2-day seminar. And one of the classes we taught was by a neuroscientist, a neurologist, a doctor, a PhD in neuropsychology. His name is Dr. Omar Mahmoud. He lives here in Irvine. So we took him out to Houston, and he gave a seminar. He gave a seminar on youth and spiritual formation. And in his presentation, he shared a story about how he went on the Umrah with Imam Suhaib Webb, who was an imam in the East Coast, and he asked this psychologist to go with him. He said sometimes when people go for the Umrah, they have a spiritual awakening, and then they also unload some of their emotional and psychological problems, and he's not licensed to handle that, so he brought a licensed psychologist along with him. So this person, Dr. Omar Mahmoud, was talking about an event. This happened recently. He was in Mecca. Or actually, he was in Medina at the time. They had just made the Umrah. They were there for this talk. They had all of these classes on Islam and the Quran, and they're praying at the Prophet's Mosque. They were in the Rawdah, all of these things. And this woman comes to have with her son. He's 22. She comes with her son, and he says, "Oh, you're here for a counseling session?" She says, "No, just my son." And she leaves her son, and she leaves. So he talks to the son. He said, "So, what can I help you with?" He said, "Well, my mother wanted me to speak to you because I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist." He said, "What do you mean you're an atheist? You're here on Umrah, and we were attending all these classes. We prayed in the Prophet's Mosque and at the Kaaba and all of this." He said, "Well, I love my parents. I want to believe. I just don't. I'm an atheist." So he unpacked. He said, "Well, how did this start? What's your story? Like, how did this come about? It doesn't just happen one night." So in college, he met some atheist friends, but it started actually before that. It went back to when he went to an Islamic school, and he had a negative experience on how Islam was taught there and the way that they disciplined. He had a traumatic experience. Somehow the way that they were disciplined, the way that Islam was being taught, gave him that negative sentimentality towards religion, towards Islam, and towards God. And they didn't talk about it at home. They didn't talk about faith at home. They didn't, they said, "Here's what you should do," but they never said, "What do you believe? What are your thoughts on this?" They didn't have conversations about that. They just had expectations, but no communication. And so the young person grew up, and he grew more distant, and the parents were unaware until at some point he came and told his parents, "By the way, I don't believe in God." It was a big shock for them. So my point is, discipline is not just about making sure your children behave. Discipline is an important part of their character, an important part of their faith. Because how you discipline them as the authority figure, but also as the person who's representing the faith in your family to them, will flavor how it is that they relate to this religion and relate to God Almighty. It's a big responsibility. So I'm going at some length about discipline because it's a big issue. and the consequences of it are tremendous, as exemplified in that story. So this brother, going back to the idea of disciplining. So one of the ways at the young age is you preempt it. Another step also for young children is to not lose control or lose your anger, lose your temper rather, and become angry. But whenever they did something wrong, instead of standing over them and speaking loudly and harshly and pointing down, try going down to their level. Going down to their level, and instead of looking at them and pointing at them and directing all of your intensity towards them, look on to the horizon, have them by your side, and it's called triangulating. You know what triangulating is? So we have 3 points. The 3 points in this triangle are you, your child, and the problem way over there. You sit down, you sit at their level, you squat down, whatever. You have your intimacy and your affection there, and you say, there's that problem over there, that misbehavior, that bad deed, that whatever, the conduct that was the cause of this need for discipline. That's a problem over there. How can we avoid falling into that problem? Have a conversation. When the child is on the defensive, they're not going to listen to anything you're saying. But here, when you're down with them, you're opening up their mind and their heart. They know that that's not acceptable. They know. Kids know when they're doing something wrong. When you yell at them, they get defensive and they develop even in their brains, they develop a fight or flight mechanism. It's called the reptilian brain becomes overdeveloped. It becomes preservationist. There's all these studies and whatnot. I don't want to become too technical, but the point is, it's not helpful to intimidate and you're already intimidating. You're 3 times as big as your child, 4 times, 5 times. Some of you 10 times, which is that's an issue of some of us 10 times, but that's another issue of fitness. But the point is, you want to triangulate. You want to go down to their level. You want to discipline them. You want them to follow the right way, but you don't want to punish. Punishing isn't the right way. As the child gets older, one of the main challenges of the child that creates this generation gap that we started with is if you look at a pie chart, or instead of a trajectory, let's look at a pie chart. A child who's 7 years old, their sphere of influence, think of it as a big pie, a big circle. 2/3 of that pie, this is the sphere of influence, the circles of it, the circle of influence, or the areas of it that influence who they are, who they listen to. 2/3 or 3/4 is you as the parents when they're 7 years old. And the other third or the other fourth is their teacher at school. That's their world. Their parents and their teacher. As they get older, the teacher gets more and the parents get less. So the teacher's influence on the child becomes extended and the parents' influence dwindles. By the way, it's always going to keep dwindling. So your high point is 7 years old. That's it. After that, it's all downhill. It's even less. It's maybe more at 5 years old or 4 or 3 years old. From the time of birth, it's all you, and then it just keeps dropping from there. But you still have the majority of influence in elementary school, and even in middle school, you still have a good, maybe just under 50% with the teacher, most of it. And then there's a new slice coming around 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, after 7 years old. There's a new slice. Friends. Friends become a bigger and bigger and bigger slice of that pie until the time they're in high school. Their friends are influencing them more than their parents and their teachers combined. It's all about the friends. It's all about the friends. This is a big challenge. Because if you have very little influence on the character of your children at that point, remember the guy who called me? My daughter's, she's already written him off. She stopped listening to him when she was 15, 14, 13. So, it was, 3, 4 years later, he's not even she's written him off. He's no longer an influence. You have to strive and struggle and provide that solid foundation when you have the influence. But then what do you do after that? How do you still at least have a semblance of influence or control over the direction of your children once they've hit age 13 or 14? And I say that very well aware that my 11-year-old is here. I still got a couple years left to maybe he'll listen to me. He's already written me off for the most part, but a couple years left, hopefully. But after that, what is your role in influencing the direction, the positive direction of their character and of their the direction that they're heading in life, their path that they're on, and their spiritual formation? What can you do? Do you just give up? Do you try and just contain them in the house and limit them and insulate them from life and reality? This is an actual question, not a rhetorical one. Anyone have any ideas? What are we going to do? Anyone had teenagers? You had teenagers. What did you do? Okay, communication, but they're not listening to you anymore. You're like a little tiny, it's such a small slice of pie, it wouldn't even fill you up after a large meal. All right, such a small slice of the pie. So what's that? Some what? Topping. Some nice sweet, whipped cream on top. All right, so what are you going to do?
Best friend relationship.
Say that again?
Best friend.
What about friends?
You be one of their best
You
friends.
become a friend, true, so maybe you can sort of straddle two different spheres, parent and then also be a friend of theirs. Excellent, yes, and this is based, of course, on the Islamic statement of you for 7 years you discipline them. For 7 years how does the statement go? The saying go? It's not a hadith, it's attributed probably to Ali or one of the Sahaba. But for 7 years you discipline them. For 7 years you advise them, I think, and for 7 years you befriend them. So you become like their friends. You become like a companion. So at a certain age, from 14 to 21, you try and be a good companion for them, a good friend. Absolutely. What's step 2? This is the key. This is the key. You guys ready? This is the answer. I have it. It's right here in my pocket. All right. Here's the answer. It takes a little bit of work, but it's worth it. It'll pay off in the long run. You help them choose their friends. And you help them choose their friends by making your home central, playground central or home base for where they hang out. And yes, maybe they'll be doing things and making a mess and whatever, but they're doing it at home where you know what's going on and you know who they're doing it with and you know the limits of what they're doing. You create your home as a home base for where they hang out. And you invite anyone and everyone who wants to be their friend to be there, and you welcome them and you get to know them. And you help them choose who's a good friend and who's not a good friend. And you encourage those relationships. Now, here's the way that we do it. That's the way we should do it. Here's the way we do it. Oh, we'll take them to an Islamic school and there'll be other Muslim kids and we'll just let them hang out with whoever's at the school because they're all Muslim. Well, the problem is, and I've taught at Islamic schools before, so has my wife. The problem with that thinking is there are a good number of our beloved community members here, fathers and mothers, who invest little to zero in creating the right environment, an Islamic environment at home for their kids, and their kids are off corrupt and corrupting. And they think, oh, I'll just send them to the Islamic school, that will take care of their character, which it doesn't. The school has some influence, but at a certain age, they're when they were at home, their character formed bad. When they sent them to school, It can only do so much. And so sometimes you assume that, oh, you send them to an Islamic school, that automatically everyone there is angelic and they're going to be good influences on my kids. That's not necessarily the case. So we send them off either to an Islamic school, or if they're not, even in a non-Islamic school, okay, go with your friends. Maybe they're Muslim or non-Muslim, but you think they're good kids, but you don't really know. You're guessing. You're assuming. What are you doing? Oh, we're studying. Or maybe they're out drinking, smoking pot, doing whatever. You don't know. Oh, he said he was studying. He's a good kid. Well, what happens is sometimes that the kids at a certain age, because they know what the expectations are at home and all of the pressures at school, they develop a split personality. They behave one way at home and another way outside of school, and you don't have any clue until your daughter ends up pregnant, until your son gets arrested for drinking alcohol or for stealing something or for, you know, being part of a gang, or all of these things happen in our communities. I'm sorry to say, but that's what happens. So you had no idea. You were oblivious as a parent because, you know, back home you let the kids go out and, you know, as long as they're with friends and everything's going to be fine. No, not here. So home base, your home is home base for hanging out. You make it as friendly as possible, as imaginable, or for them to hang out at home. You create that environment at home. And it's difficult if both parents are working. It's difficult. There's all these challenges, but I tell you, my dear brothers and sisters, there is nothing more valuable that you can do once they reach that certain age than making your home the place where they like to spend time with their friends. Because their friends are going to influence them, and all you can do is help them in choosing the right friends and making sure that their friends are good influences on them. And their friends could be Muslim or non-Muslim. It doesn't make any difference. But they should, if they're non-Muslim friends, your child should have no qualms, no challenges, no problem saying, well, I'm Muslim. This is what it means to be Muslim. And yes, we pray and we fast, and that's what makes me unique. And you do something else, but at least that's part of their identity. They don't develop a split personality. They don't have a conflicting personality between their identity as a Muslim and their identity as American. Because you can help them navigate those waters and say, well, I'm American, and what that means is maybe I like watching basketball, maybe I like dressing a certain way or listening to a certain kind of music, but I'm Muslim in that I try not to lie, cheat, steal, behave in ways that are un-Islamic. I try to study hard and excel in my work and my homework and in my studies. I treat my family. Family is important. These are Islamic values. So you instill those values in your child, which are also American values. So that's why I'm saying that American culture and Islamic culture are not at odds. If you approach American culture from a certain perspective, because there's not one American culture, there are American cultures. There's a spectrum. There's a whole variety of ways you can approach being American. And some of them are right in sync with being Muslim. And it's for you to help your child select what kind of American kid they're going to be. You don't want them to be Arab or Pakistani or whatever. You want them to be Muslim. And they're already American, so you want them to be the kind of American that's in sync with their being Muslim. Yes? It's time for the adhan? Khalas. I thought I promised you interaction. I only asked you like 3 questions. So before we do the adhan, if you don't mind, is there any pressing question or issue? I'll entertain and then we'll do the adhan. Say that one more time. What's the consequences of being too lenient with your children? So there's 2 kinds of child abuse. The kind in which you're overly strict and the kind in which you're negligent of your children. And by being too lenient, and there's a spectrum of what it means to be lenient, but the extreme of which is to, your kid does whatever, you don't really care. You don't pay attention, it's a kind of neglect. They don't feel loved. They don't feel, when your child has boundaries, even though they push against them, they know that and if you're able to communicate effectively, they know that you're doing that out of love in the end of the day. They might really dislike it, but they know that you love them and you're putting in all that effort because you care for them. If they don't feel any boundaries at all, psychologically they feel insecure, and they act out in ways that are destructive, self-destructive. It can manifest itself in a number of psychological or sociological ways. So having a lack of boundaries, it results in an insecurity, psychological insecurity that results in acting out in ways that are destructive. And having firm boundaries, but boundaries that are not so constricting or so limiting, but having boundaries nonetheless is a healthy thing. If your boundaries are too limiting or too constricting, what happens is your child will ultimately feel defeated at home, but as soon as they have an outlet, they're going to break out of jail, and they're going to go to the opposite extreme. I met so many children who had that kind of really rigid, where the parent didn't evolve in the way they treated them. They were children the whole time, and they didn't have the skill set on how to help make decisions when they were in the teenage years and when they were in high school, and make mistakes and correct them and learn from their mistakes. So that as soon as they were in college, they went and they drank and they had all kinds of un-Islamic behaviors. I met so many children like that, so many in college. A good percentage of the children in college who have an overly strict upbringing. It's like a yin-yang, this idea of the pendulum swinging from one side to the next. So you have to have boundaries that are not too liberal and that are not too constricting, and you want to enforce those boundaries. If you have boundaries that you don't enforce, then you also don't have respect of your child. The child learns not to respect you. So, thank you very much. I don't want to delay the Isha. I feel guilty for that. So, but I wanted to thank you all for those who stuck with me this whole time. To bless you for your dedication and commitment. And let's conclude with a dua. Oh Allah, we ask you for your wisdom and your guidance. We say every day in our prayer, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. We are asking for your guidance in making these daily decisions that either bring us closer to you or lead us farther away from you. Guide us in the pathway that leads us closer to you. Let us to be good spouses, good individuals, good spouses, good parents, and good children to our parents as well, but good members of the community who contribute and make this world and this society a better place. O Allah, accept from us our good deeds, increase us in them, and forgive us for our shortcomings, our missteps, and our transgressions. Let us not to carry around any hatred or animosity towards those who've transgressed against us. Let us to be examples and models for others, as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an example for us. O Allah, zidna ilma. O Allah, increase us in knowledge and in piety and in God consciousness, and prepare us for that day in which we will stand before you and be held to account individually. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.